From the campus of the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, this is Marketing Matters on Business Radio.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to Marketing Matters here on Business Radio, SiriusXM 132. I'm Barbara Kahn, the Patty and J.H. Baker Professor of Marketing, and I'm joined by my co-host, Americus Reed, the Whitney M. Young Jr. Professor of Marketing and the Brand Identity Theorist. And today we're going to recap our 2024 Super Bowl commercials. Americus, did you see any of them?
I loved it all. Okay, Barbara, you got to tell me your top commercial. Tell it to me. I'll give you mine first, okay?
Okay, good.
Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, that one was great.
I loved it, and here's why. I think first of all, one of the big trends is that there were tons of celebrities jam-packed into these ads. I think the ones that really stood out tried to really saturate with lots and lots of celebrity. But I loved it because Ben Affleck has been sort of blasted in the news about being this sort of low-energy guy. Yeah. He's not fun. He doesn't seem to have fun when he's with J-Lo, and I thought that attempt to really sort of make fun of himself was actually pretty cool, and to just have, Tom Brady there and Matt Damon and Fat Joe and J-Lo, and they're sort of all in this mode, and he really went in on that, and so I really appreciated that from a humor perspective.
Yeah, I don't do favorites. I usually do the ones I don't like. Okay. That's just my personality.
That's shocking. But I gotta say, Barbara, that's so on brand for you.
Should I tell you the one
What were you most negative about?
Yeah, what was I most negative about? I did not love the Dove one.
Okay.
Because I did not like the fact that here's this big sporting event, and we're really interested in female athletes, and we're showing this video of little girls falling.
Gotcha.
And I understand that wasn't the point.
Yep.
The point was that they're resilient and they can pick up from falls, and it was a body image, body confidence ad, and I get what Dove was saying, but the visceral effect of watching these powerful athletes in the Super Bowl do incredible athletic things, and then watching these little girls fall.
Oh, wow.
I didn't like that juxtaposition, and it really bothered me that they did something like that. So even though I applaud them for what they're trying to do, I felt like in context, it wasn't the right place for it.
Interesting. Well, we're going to need a guru to step in and help us out,
really
unpack
help.
all of this stuff.
So enough of what we think, right? Let's bring in someone who knows what they're talking about. Yep. So we have as our guest today, Jameson Fleming, who's Adweek's managing editor of marketing and agencies, and he focuses on the business of marketing. And have you watched every single ad, Jameson?
I have probably watched every ad about 10 times over. It's 7 or 8 years since I've been doing this.
Nice. Okay, so forget about
there's nothing that slips by me these days.
Well, let me ask you then. We gave you 2 ads that are pretty well-known, prominent ads, had a lot of hype before and will likely have a lot of hype after. It was a hit and a miss in our definitions. Americus gave you a hit in Dunkin' Donuts. I gave you what I thought was a miss in Dove. What is your feeling about those 2 ads?
So I liked both of those ads. I tend to not love celebrity-heavy ads, but Dunkin', because they made it very much an ensemble, and it felt like everybody played a key part and everybody was memorable from that ad, because you're going to remember Tom Brady and J-Lo.
Yep.
And I mean, Matt Damon is what made that ad work with his punchlines. And then Ben Affleck's performance was also extremely strong. And so I thought that one worked extremely well because it was a true ensemble performance where nobody really stood out over anybody else. And it was just a fun ad. With Dove, we really liked that ad. I totally get where you're coming from in terms of that juxtaposition. But I think what Dove was really trying to say is, if we support little girls and teenage girls as they come up through sports, and we help them overcome some of the issues that they face, like they're not going to get knocked down as as they do in the beginning of the ad. And so I like the overall message.
I like the message.
I totally get where you're coming from in terms of, it does kind of look weird to like have girls getting knocked down, in this kind of context.
Yeah, no, I definitely like the message, and I applaud their messages over the years. We definitely use them as, role model ads for position of women. It just didn't land good on you. Work right for me in this setting. Yeah. There was talking about celebrity. There was another ad set that came up a lot that had a lot of celebrities, and I think it was what you were talking about, not the best use of celebrities, which was the Home.com ads. Did you have a reaction to those ads?
Yeah, the homes.com and even the apartments.com ad with Jeff Goldblum, I thought they landed decently. Because there were so many, some of them I think did better than the others. Like I think the 30-second one where they're in the salon was pretty hysterical, but the 60-second one where they introduced the campaign was fine. I think Jeff Goldblum at the end kind of saves that one. And I think he also kind of saves the apartments.com ad because the writing in that one was okay, but Jeff Goldblum's just such a good performer that it overall feels like a good ad. But it was kind of interesting to see one brand like that go so heavy with 2.5 minutes of airtime across 2 brands and 4 commercials was a pretty bold move by a brand that isn't a traditional big time advertiser.
Interesting.
So another one who's not a traditional advertising, this one I thought did really well actually, and I think it's very interesting what they were doing. Americus and I were talking about it last night. We watched a lot of these together.
We were actually at a party.
Yeah,
watching ads
them
and watching
together.
the game. Yeah.
So one I thought was very interesting brand is Poppy.
Poppy.
And that came in at the last minute. It's the new age beverage. What did you think about that?
Yeah, the Poppy commercial is interesting because, the copywriting in it is really strong, and the strategy behind it is great. They were basically telling 100 plus million people that the new age of soda begins today, and that new age is us.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So it's a really strong message and a bold claim, and I'm going to imagine their short-term sales are going to go through the roof of people wanting to try this beverage.
Yeah.
I didn't love all the imagery. Like at the beginning of the ad, it's kind of comparing Poppy to some of the most monumental achievements in human history.
Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch.
And I thought that was a bit much.
Yeah.
But
right.
I thought the overall kind of positioning that they put out there was really fascinating. And if you're going to kind of try to change an entire category, what better way to do it than in front of 100 million people?
And let me just say really quickly, Barbara, because I was talking to some folks in our cohort and they were like, Poppy, Timu, what is this stuff? When I was walking my daughter to school today.
They all know. Oh, yes. I was going to say that Poppy ad is a big hit already on TikTok.
That's right. And you said it's really for this younger crowd in this TikTok generation, right?
And also, it's going to follow up with a very strong online follow-up. So they're going to use this to get more awareness. They already have pretty much awareness. And then they're going to follow up with a pretty detailed strategy online on Amazon and on their social media.
Right.
So they're crazy like a fox kind of brand,
Yes.
And the idea that I think they last minute, I think I read in one of your stories that they last minute got the spot. They weren't sure they were going to do it. Do you know anything about that? Like it wasn't pre-planned so much?
No, they haven't talked to us much about the strategy. It's a conversation one of our reporters is going to most likely have with them this week to better understand it. But I mean, the other thing I want to point out with them was they were really smart in terms of how they spent their money. They could have bought 30 seconds, got celebrities, and had the total cost of the ad come out to the equivalent of probably a full minute of airtime. But because they did something that, was definitely low budget, they were able to buy a full minute and really stretch their budget quite further than if they had gone a celebrity route with a big time ad agency that would have had a huge fee. So it was a really economical use of their money too, which was pretty impressive.
Talking about celebrities, I don't think there's anybody bigger than Queen Beyonce. So what did you think about Verizon's strategy and the way they introduced her?
So first of all, Barbara, are you a Verizon customer? What?
No. No.
Do you even know your carrier?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. No, I'm AT&T.
You're AT&T. Okay,
what are you?
Interesting. I'm Verizon. Yeah.
So you think that we were reacting to it differently?
It was just a hypothesis that I had, perhaps.
I loved her ad.
I loved her ad as well. I don't love Verizon that much. It's more or less kind of,
you know what the right answer is about Beyonce.
Yes. I do know what the right answer is. Yes, I know what to say very clearly because the Beehive will come after you.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but it was very interesting. What were your thoughts on that specific commercial, Barbara?
Well, they also did breadcrumbs on it. So they didn't really, like the Dove commercial, for example, I saw before the Super Bowl. But I don't think you could see all the Beyonce stuff before. And she made big announcements and she used it to get her own, music out there and what her announcements were and the brand. And I was looking forward to seeing that. And I thought the breadcrumb kind of strategy really worked for me. So I thought it was a great ad. But Jameson, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, we ranked it very highly at Adweek. We were under we kind of thought they was going to be announcing a residency in Las Vegas. And so we were kind of surprised when it was, hinting at new music at the end, which, like 20 minutes after the ad aired, she announced that there was going to be new music coming. But from a business standpoint with Verizon, it was a very smart play because they kind of left the breadcrumbs out there, as you said. Like the first teaser, there was 6 references to Beyonce. The second teaser, there's one very obvious reference to Beyonce. And so something is coming. Our fans are starting to get excited because we're going to get some kind of Beyonce announcement last night. And, Verizon did deliver. The ad itself was pretty fun. Verizon and Beyonce have worked together in the past on different initiatives. And so for Verizon, I thought it was extremely smart to continue to tie themselves to Beyonce because other than Taylor Swift, there is no fuzzier person on the planet right now than Beyonce. So 100%. It was really smart. If you're not going to get Taylor Swift, get yourself on the Beyonce train.
Absolutely.
Jamison Fleming, Adweek's managing editor of marketing, joining us on this special post-Super Bowl game show. Jamison, I have to ask you a question. You as well, Barbara. In terms of contrasting ads, Jesus. I was thrown off. I mean, the washing the feet thing, the imagery was beautiful, but it was weird, man. I mean, at the risk of sounding sacrilegious, Jamison, what did you think about the Jesus ads?
To their credit, they went with a positive message this year. Last year, they had a very divisive ad that very much played on the left wing versus right wing, cultural war type stuff going on in this country. And I thought it was arguably one of the worst ads that have run in the Super Bowl. This year, they at least went with a very, strong message. And so I'll give them credit for that. But yeah, in terms of it being in the Super Bowl, I don't know. It just feels so out of place. I much more gravitate towards Stand Up for Jewish Hate from the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism. That was much more about, if you see hate, say something. And it was all hate. You don't even realize that this is, targeted towards one specific group until the final couple seconds of the ad.
Right.
So I thought that was a much better message and much more effective message because it really raised all people up as opposed to just one specific group.
So you keep alluding to this list you guys have. Like, what's on the top of the list? What are your 3 best ads?
Yeah, so we went with Sarah V as our #1 overall ad.
I was just about to ask you about that one.
Yeah, so that was interesting because it was one of the most brilliant lead-up campaigns that we've seen in the last half decade for the Super Bowl. They did all this influencer work, like Verizon. They left all these breadcrumbs of like, this feels like it's going to end in a Super Bowl ad, but nobody knew for sure, or if this was just kind of like an influencer play that they were working with. And so we've never seen anything like that a brand do. And so it culminates. The 30-second ad was good, but the longer cut is one of the best ads that we've seen in a long time. And so even though the 30-second didn't live up to the full minute 16 version of it, we still thought the overall campaign made it the best ad in the game. The second one was the Paramount Plus entertainment, a mountain of entertainment. And that's a campaign that they've been running for a handful of years.
Right.
And we thought this one was just the best version of it. You put in Creed, Patrick Stewart, Arnold from Hey Arnold, and then the punchline at the end with Peppa Pig, where they're looking for a pigskin, is just too good. And then the final one in our top 3 was State Farm. That was a late buy in the game as well. State Farm had initially said, we're not going to advertise. And High Dive, their agency, came to them with this great concept, and they shot it, they made it, and they said, we're going to be in the Super Bowl. And they delivered, absolutely hysterical spot with Arnold Schwarzenegger, with kind of the twist ending with Danny DeVito to throw back to Twins days, and it was just really well done.
Yeah, so that was one of your favorites too.
It was.
Americus?
It was very, very funny for me, and I think that it's super interesting in the sense that, to your point, Jamison, talk a little bit about this, because when you lean in on a specific cultural nostalgic moment, that's a bit of a risk, because if you don't know the history of, say, for example, a Christopher Walken or Arnold Schwarzenegger or the Danny DeVito Arnold Schwarzenegger relationship, you're not going to get it. And I think, Barbara, you were saying like it just didn't land because you didn't have that context.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, Jameson, the idea of leaning in on some really powerful cultural moment and the risk of some people just not getting it because they're just not aware of that cultural, iconic context.
There were a number of ads that were hearkening back to something you need to know to get it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Jameson?
Yeah, it's a bit of a risk, but it also is, if you do the right cultural references, it's one of those things that, it's one of those, if you know, you know, and that is so valuable for brands right now. If you can tap into a community and kind of trigger that, if you know response from people, it's going to go over really well. What was really smart about the State Farm ad was you didn't really need to know what twins was to enjoy that, because it's only the last 7 seconds of the ad. And even if you don't know that the two of them were in an ad or in a movie together, just the juxtaposition of Arnold Schwarzenegger next to Danny DeVito is funny in of itself. And so they were really smart that they didn't go all in on twins, and that you get 50 seconds of Arnold Schwarzenegger saying neighbor over and over again, and saying labor, and like all of those jokes, and they land really well. But it is risky, because like a couple of years ago, Verizon did a Cable Guy reference. Cable Guy wasn't even that popular when it came out, and so for someone like me who's in my mid-30s, like I had never seen Cable Guy, I didn't get that reference. And I think it is very risky. You have to be very smart about what kind of IP you're going to play off of.
So what about the traditional ads that we usually see, like Bud and Volkswagen, the car ads? And what do you think about the Budweiser ads or the Volkswagen ads or
BMW?
Yeah, BMW. Well, I think we talked about BMW.
Yeah, that was Christopher Walken.
Yeah. But VW and say Bud and Bud Light.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, the Anheuser-Busch portfolio, and even the whole beer portfolio. If you look at Coors Light bringing back the Silver Bullet train, I thought a lot of those generally fell flat. I mean, Michelob spent God knows how much money on Lionel Messi to kick a football or kick a soccer ball up a beach. And Budweiser, I mean, it was a fine ad. I think it's probably the best ad with a Clydesdale since Puppy Love a decade ago.
And it ended the same way as Puppy Love.
Yeah, I mean, it panders to a very specific audience who loves that kind of nostalgia play. It's overall going to do well, but like, is that going to sell beer in this day and age?
Well, you got to remember they're trying to unsell controversy and get back to sell beer. So like maybe what you're saying is exactly what they were going for. Let's like cut the controversy a little. Go back to what we used to do.
Interesting. And I will say Messi is a much better kicker than Gronk.
So I think it's time for FanDuel to probably retire the kick of destiny.
So that's an interesting question, though, I wanted to ask. We were talking about that last night. So we know, what's it, 30 seconds or a minute is $7 million? I mean, it's very expensive to buy time on Super Bowl, right? And then when you pay for all those celebrities, do they charge their full price? Or like, I mean, how much does it cost to get all those celebrities?
I mean, it's expensive. I mean, if it's a true A-list celebrity, like my guess for Messi was he was probably north of $8 million.
Wow.
And that's just kind of my own speculation, but my guess is that's probably about what he was.
Wow.
And when you get to some of the lesser celebrities, you're looking at $3 to $5 million, and then kind of it's a lot of money. And so
can I get a $150?
I mean, $15 million on airtime plus that celebrity, it's crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because when you hear about how expensive a Super Bowl ad is, it's just buying the time. It's not the production value.
That's 100%.
And then you feature all these celebrities. They can't come cheap.
Yeah. And the game itself, I mean, we're talking about, $7,000 tickets, right?
Yeah. Well, and that Travis Kelce spent $1 million on his suite for his family and Taylor's family, which he told us over and over. Was it worth a Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah.
So okay, so those were your top three. Which ones do you think really failed?
Let's just say which ones were challenged.
Okay.
Barbara, I gotta lift your spirits. I'm gonna have you more optimistic.
Which ones didn't land as well as they might have?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like two different buckets to that. There's like the advertisers that have low budget ads, like CrowdStrike and Bass Pro Shops and the ones who aren't trying to just like wow you, like they have a specific purpose in the game, and by the fact that they keep coming back, like it must be working for them. Skechers is another one. Then there's the ones that are like the high budget brands that do seem like they were really trying to win over consumers and fell flat. Oreo was one of those for me where they were trying to make twisting happen, where consumers twist Oreos but they don't make decisions off of them, and they were trying to make that happen as a thing. That just didn't resonate with me. Uber Eats, I struggled with because I just didn't think the jokes were good for the most part. And they even had to edit their ad at the last second because they had a peanut, somebody having a peanut reaction, not remembering that there's peanuts and peanut butter.
Oh, dear.
And so all the food allergy networks went after Uber Eats, like, how dare you do this? And so they had to edit their ad at the last second. They got bad press for that. And so it's like those kind of ads where they were high budget and then they didn't
land.
work.
Yeah.
Those to me are the fails of the night, because if you've got a CrowdStrike or some of these lesser brands who are just happy to be there and have a specific reason, like, I'm not going to yell at them for having a bad ad.
Yeah, interesting. So let me get really quick, Jameson, let me get your thoughts on Halftime Show. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, Usher appeared, Barbara, in some of the ads. Yeah. And so, but it's really, really hard to come out there and be phenomenal during the halftime performance. What were your thoughts, Jameson, on that as a marketing opportunity, as a opportunity to elevate things like that?
Yeah, I didn't really come away from the halftime performance thinking like, oh, I need to go check out like what Usher is up to. Like last year with Rihanna.
Well,
like,
she was awesome.
Google
she was my
what
favorite.
Everything is going on with Rihanna after that performance.
Right, exactly.
And with Usher and all the guests that he had on there, Alicia Keys, and I forget who the other musicians were off the top of my head. You didn't come away going like, oh man, I'm going to go listen to some Usher this week. And so it didn't feel like the walk down memory lane that maybe we thought we were going to get with Usher, because he was such a strong presence for the 2000s. And it just, I don't know, it just didn't come across that way. And I feel like the social reaction was generally the same of, it was a fine show, but you didn't come away going like, oh man, Usher, like, I forgot about him. He's great.
Interesting. So I was just going to say, Barbara, really quickly, here's a question for you, trivia question. Who sponsored the halftime performance? A brand sponsored the halftime performance. What brand was that? Do you remember?
Was it Apple Music?
Apple, yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? We were having this conversation. It was like, oh yeah, it was Apple. That might have been a miss, quite honestly, right?
Yeah, it wasn't salient, but I only knew it because I knew it.
Yeah, right. So interesting, because Apple is really, a prominent brand that's out there, and you expect them to do like phenomenal things. I mean, they had that very famous 1984 classic, Think Different Super Bowl commercial directed by Ridley Scott and so on and so forth. So you always expect them to be at the top of the entertainment spectrum in terms of, showing up at these sorts of events. So that was a little bit interesting as well.
And Las Vegas and that whole thing, we talked a lot about that before this started with the Sphere, and they kept showing pictures of the Sphere. What was your take on how the Sphere play into any of this? Did you have any?
Yeah, what are your thoughts, Jameson, on the Sphere?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a great brand play during events. For how much they charge on it regularly, I don't feel like it's probably a great brand investment when there's not a big event going on. But Las Vegas definitely proved itself to be the ideal location for brands to have a Super Bowl, because they were activating all the way up and down the Strip with huge, impressive activations like we really haven't seen at a Super Bowl. And so if it was up to brands, they would probably want the Super Bowl back in Vegas as often as the NFL is willing to do it.
And, another thing that people sometimes forget to ask about, what about the football? So,
there was a football game.
I mean, the first half of the game was relatively boring. The second half of the game was awesome. Yeah. And what about the placement of the ads? The ones who did you track like the ones who were later in the game and earlier in the game, and how that worked out for the success of the ad placement within the game?
It's interesting because it's such a gamble on where you place your ad, because you're guaranteed high viewership in the first half, and then the second half you really don't know. And then this had the added wrinkle of overtime, where brands were offered the opportunity sort of on the spot.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did that work?
Slot?
Oh, that's interesting.
And so we only saw one brand out of those 5 ads that was in the game, and that was State Farm cut down their 60 into a 30-second. Wow. The other 4 brands were either pregame or not at all. So you had Discover, which was a pregame ad. There was, I think, a cereal brand that was one of those ads. And then I think you had 2 movie trailers from Universal that were not during the game. And so Universal, essentially upped their spend by $15 million to show 2 more trailers in overtime. And so CBS walked away with an extra $35 million in ad revenue.
That's super interesting, because I was thinking it was a very long game. And then we were thinking it went into overtime. I think that there's only 2 Super Bowl games that went into overtime, so you don't predict that's going to happen.
That's right.
Plus, that was such an exciting conclusion.
100%.
So you have everybody watching that with intensity.
See, but here's something interesting, Barbara. Two-tailed hypothesis. If it's close and you're in the game, are you distracted from the commercials?
No, you need the relief. Are you kidding me?
Right? Okay,
you are so tense. Like, what is going to happen to Travis Kelce? That is what you're worried about.
Fair enough. But if I'm bored, I'm like, I don't know. It's like, okay, the ads. Let me at least pay attention to the ads, right? But you're saying that
it's a relief.
It goes
Actually,
up.
there's research about that, you know? Like, if you get that relief, it helps with the intensity.
It helps with the intensity.
I personally think those ads at the end got really good placement. Well, and if they had to make the money, the decision last minute, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Very, very cool.
So how does that work? They just decide and then they run it like somebody's making a split-second decision like that? Is that what you're saying actually happened, Jameson?
So some brands in advance may raise their hand and say, like, hey, if the game goes to overtime, we're in. But CBS will also give brands an opportunity to say, like, hey, we could be headed to overtime. Anybody interested in buying? So I know Discover was one of those brands that they had an opportunity in the fourth quarter where CBS came to them because they had already had a pregame ad and said, hey, do you want to go in overtime? And I would guess because Discover went pregame, they probably saw good response to their ad and said, like, hey, people liked our ad, let's go for it. It's going to be worth this $7 million to do it. So,
the price doesn't change, Jameson. Is that correct? It's actually, because I could imagine, I guess if you're asked to do it and you haven't raised your hand, I guess they could charge more to a certain extent, right? But you're saying you get that locked in price no matter what. You just get first right to refusal if you've already said, hey, I'm interested in potentially putting an ad in the overtime part. Is that correct?
From our knowledge, yes. CBS has never outright said that, like, it's $7 million, but based off of previous reporting we've done, we're pretty confident that you get somewhere around that rate.
Wow.
It might be give or take a couple $100,000 either way, but it's basically the same rate as you get in a game.
Jameson, thank you so much for joining us today.
So much to
and
unpack.
Where can our listeners go to keep up with you?
Yeah, just go to adweek.com. We cover the Super Bowl in and out, and then the other 360 days of the year. We're the most read publication for advertising, media, and marketing. So we
there's
cover
an ad.
everything, everything you do.
You're good at your job, Jameson.
You're the Patrick Mahomes of advertising gurus.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being on our show and helping us debrief the Super Bowl. We're going to take a short break, and up next is Allison Griffin, State Farm's head of marketing. This is Marketing Matters Business Radio, SiriusXM 132. Welcome back to Marketing Matters here on Business Radio, SiriusXM 132. I'm Barbara Kahn, the Patty and J.H. Baker Professor of Marketing. I'm joined by my co-host, Americus Reed, the Whitney M. Young Jr. Professor of Marketing and the Brand Identity Theorist. And today, we are talking about the marketing highlights from the 2024 Super Bowl.
Super Bowl 58, Barbara.
58, yeah. And now it's time, as you just heard, for our Spotlight segment. And who we want to spotlight in this is a special moment for us.
Absolutely.
Is the State Farm advertising
100%.
Campaign, because they did something pretty iconic, and we'd like to unpack what happened
before
there.
you jump in, Barbara, can I just say this? You ready for me?
Okay.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is deal. Okay, that wasn't my best Schwarzenegger, but you get the
point. It was close, absolutely close. So that was the ad. That was the movie as he set it up on who's Jimmy Fallon's show.
Yeah.
And to talk about this and the idea and whether or not it went over, but I think it did go over. Yes, was Allison Griffin, who's State Farm's head of marketing. Welcome to our show, Allison. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly my pleasure.
So in case anybody didn't see it, which is like, what planet are they on? But let's just assume, why don't you just debrief very quickly what the ad was, and then we can unpack the campaign and how you decided to do it, because it was really an unusual ad and an unusual idea.
Yeah, thanks so much. So it was a 60-second spot that appeared to start out like a movie where action hero, agent State Farm, Arnold Schwarzenegger is saving puppies and says, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. And then you realize, cut, a director then says, hey, Arnold, it's neighbor. I'm hearing neighbor. And it then proceeds for 60 seconds, different scenarios, saving from a house fire, a lady in labor from an explosion in a factory, a helicopter scene. So several quintessential action hero spots where over and over Agent State Farm is saying neighbor sort of incorrectly. And then the twist at the end is the script change comes in, and Agent State Farm is actually replaced by an additional Agent State Farm in the form of Danny DeVito, who delivers the line, the iconic line, perfectly. And at the end, Arnold says, "Danny, you're a backstabber." And Danny says, "No, I'm a backstabber."
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. So, like, there was a lot to this ad. Like, you started off with having Arnold joining Jimmy Fallon to break the news, and I watched that bit. That was hysterical. So, like, did that come after the fact, or that was all part of the campaign, or like, how did you build this whole thing up?
So I'll kind of take two steps back, and I promise we'll get to the Fallon activation as part of it. So like any good marketer, you have a brief, and this year our brief was solely cemented around our slogan, "Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there."
Okay.
Several years ago, when we were trying to sort of catapult the asset Jake from State Farm, we also had a linear television Super Bowl ad where Drake from State Farm iconically delivered a line. And that we saw and learned that Super Bowl execution kind of cemented the visibility of Jake from State Farm, reinvigorating that brand asset. And we could then build over time from that moment.
Yes,
I can
yes.
see
And so
that.
we wanted to use this cultural moment to do the same for our slogan.
Yeah, and I want to jump in really quickly, Allison, because this is something I want to get your feedback in on, Allison, and you too, Barbara. The notion of the category. We're talking about insurance. And so it's not something you can see and touch. It's kind of a different product category, right? You don't really know, you don't really want to buy it, but you know you need it. And so the way you market that kind of a product is going to be completely different. You need a different way to connect with people. And is this part of the strategy here?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're saying. I agree. And that's what Allison is saying. With insurance, the slogan is very meaningful.
Very meaningful.
And the idea of doing an ad, which is what I think she's saying, about that slogan, which is speaking to the unique selling proposition of the brand, is a very interesting strategy.
Yeah, so we are under no delusion that anyone in the country cares at all about the category of insurance. I know it. Let alone, I'll say, Gen Z, millennials, younger millennials, right? Their attention is hard to catch. They are distracted across all the different avenues and platforms where their attention is being sought after. And again, insurance isn't a category that they'll stop and go, I wonder what about the insurance category is doing today. And so in order to set yourself apart, humor is one that most of the category uses today. You can see it pretty much across the board. But being relevant, so Jake from State Farm is one way we've become more and more relevant, where
100%.
he is the personification of what it means to be a good neighbor. He's not a pitch man. He doesn't sell anything. He's just a good neighbor. And then the slogan, "Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there," and the jingle associated with it is really important. And for young people today, and you guys, sitting with college students more often every day than I am, you know this better than I do, but being able to break through and a brand to share its purpose and its meaning matters more and more today. And so celebrating just the words "like a good neighbor," and then from here we will catapult into, well, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's interesting, because what you're doing in this ad is making the slogan literally more familiar, but you're not digging into the meaning of it, because the execution of this ad isn't really about the meaning, whereas with the Jake campaigns, it was about the meaning of what Jake was. Here, it's really about familiarity of the slogan.
I'll say both things. We did have the deliverer of the line is Agent State Farm, the superhero who is there helping
fair
you
point.
in every possible way.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And the grandfather
So I'll say a
bodybuilder.
little bit. There's a little bit in there by design, but
Yeah.
but to the point, our goal for this year going into 2024 is to continue to unpack that meaning. So I mean, look, we know that the jingle is iconic. I mean, it's
100%.
not unknown today, right? People know it.
Right.
But we want to reintroduce it to those who may not realize or pay attention. And to the point that you just stated, we want to continue to create meaning for it throughout the year. And so for us, taking a step back, the brief was around the iconic slogan, making it famous. So then the creative, and now this is getting to, I know your question was Jimmy Fallon,
Right.
but the creative for us, and every year, if you want to later talk about what we did in 21, 22, 23, and then now 24, there was a lead up in how we came to
I
get
actually
here.
did want to talk about that, but let's do
Okay,
this
good.
one.
I'll
Here's
get
a-
there. For this one, though, where we are is how do we cement it and then create meaning? And so the creative drove the celebrity. So I know there's a lot of talk in Super Bowl ads of cost and celebrities and do you need celebrities and all of that.
We
And
just talked about that
our
ourselves.
feeling,
Right.
yes, our feeling is that the best creative is one where it couldn't just swap out, oh, well, we'll approach this celebrity, and if he can't do it, we'll go to her.
Right.
And if she can't do it, we'll go to this person down the line.
Right.
If Arnold wasn't available
Right.
or willing, this spot would
Wouldn't
not
have
have
worked.
been
Absolutely.
the one we created.
That's right. That's right.
Right. Okay.
No, that's a fantastic
All right. So we
point.
got the brief. We got the celebrity.
Yeah. So then we were like, all right, well, if we've got Arnold, and we always had, the creative was always around an action hero, an Agent State Farm, because we've got nearly 20,000 independent contractor State Farm agents across the country, and they're in communities in every zip code here in the United States. And they are doing these superhero type things for their communities every day. So there was like that notion of who are we? What do we mean? How do we, get Arnold to demonstrate this superhero-ness, to lean into what do we mean that we can unpack for the rest of the year? And so how do we make the most interest around a spot if we're going to make the investment, and if we're going to spend the time and energy to do a spot, then what's the surround? And the surround, including Jimmy Fallon, was, hey, let's for fun launch a pretend trailer. So we started several weeks ago and said a
It's
movie.
fantastic.
Then, and we said nothing about it. We had an IMDb page. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jake were caught by the paparazzi working out at Gold's Gym in Los Angeles.
Fantastic.
And really got paparazzi photos of them there, which was part of it, right? That the two of them are working on a movie. And then slowly but surely thinking about, well, what would a movie star do if they truly were launching a new movie? They would go on Jimmy Fallon. And I'll pause here around Jimmy Fallon and say, he's not just a celebrity we hired to be one of our current spots. He currently is in a service campaign around our jingle. He shows up when someone says, "Are you joking?" 3
Right.
times.
I've seen that ad.
He's summoned. So he's not around this topic because of that. We are working with him in a deeper collaboration, and we have Jimmy in the writing room with us. And so that was way before this spot, this particular spot.
That's smart.
And so when we solidified the spot and when we knew what we were doing, we said, hey, Jimmy, what do you think? And help us come up with a spot.
So that's a much bigger deal about Jimmy. That's why you held off for a second, because the Jimmy Fallon point is a much bigger point.
We were talking about humor that doesn't work. I mean, one of the best ways to mitigate that is to hire really good comedy writers like Jimmy Fallon and work with these most creative people.
And he's also he's good at improv, so that he can go with something and he can take it and move it in interesting ways. And that makes it very interesting to then have Arnold come on his show. I mean, I didn't know all that backstory.
That's awesome.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it was fun. So we worked with NBC and Jimmy Fallon, of course, and Arnold's team and Jake from State Farm. So we had two segments on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. One was the typical Arnold at the desk, and he's, let's say, hawking his new movie.
Yeah.
And Jimmy was such a great support in how we rolled that part out. And then in addition, they did one of those game that the Tonight Show does with some celebrities where they play a game in the second segment, and we brought Jake from State Farm out. And if you watched that spot and noticed, the Roots were playing our jingle subtly in the background.
So
brilliant. Yeah.
So as you're talking through this is like a lot more depth than I expected.
Yeah.
Even in the Jimmy Fallon question. Well, so was that considered a paid ad, or was that? I mean, did you have to pay to do that, or how did that work?
No.
That's beautiful.
We did not.
The other thing that I think is super interesting, Allison, is this idea of, and Barbara and I talk about it all the time, how the storytelling part, the narrative piece, and entertaining people, and a story that runs through various different threads is very different when the promotional piece stops becoming the promotional thing necessarily, and it's more entertainment and creative and entertainment first. And then,
itself,
by the way,
right.
it creates a connection of resonance for your brand potentially. Can you talk about that? We've talked about this, Barbara, flipping the sort of script, if you will.
Right.
It sounds like that was the strategy here. Is that correct, Allison?
Yeah, 100%. And that was where we were like this 360 on steroids. It's, everything from the movie page and the paparazzi moment and creating a movie poster. Oh, we had a theme song, by the way. Very, very popular TikToker, Lauren Gray, wrote the score as any action movie would have.
Of course.
James Bond, right? You've got a big famous score. And so we did that. And then, of course, there was a concentric circle of internet influencers that would do Get Ready With Me videos of lifestyle. We're going to the premiere. So we had a red carpet event.
Wow.
Smart.
Oh, my God.
It's very deep.
Yeah. It kept going. And then the other way to get more and more, again, more the Gen Z younger audiences interested is we also contracted with very talented internet influencers who were artists, all in different genres, like painting, models, figures, songs, dancers.
Wow.
So there were, I think, 13. We could get the exact number here if we need the exact number, but it was about 13 to 15 influencers who were all also driving excitement and interest around Agent State Farm. Again, without anybody knowing that the actual joke was "nay-bah" over and over and over, right? Yeah. So they were just sort of riffing on superhero and an agent being a hero. So it was subtly another way that our meaning was being interpreted to wider and wider audiences in the lead up to the actual spot.
So what I like about this, in addition to what you're saying in how it's building up this whole narrative and what Americus was saying also, but what I like about it is you don't put all the weight on the commercial.
Right.
So if the commercial doesn't land, which is possible, you might think it's funny, but maybe in the moment when it plays, it's not that funny. You have all this other stuff going. So you haven't invested all this money in one spot and then it falls flat, which we were just talking about. That happened to some brands. Their ads just didn't hit. You don't have that problem because you have so much else going on. And anything that happens that hits,
diversified creativity.
is going to promote the slogan, which is what your point is. So you can't lose.
And I'll add one more layer here.
This is so appropriate that it's insurance. It's so appropriate.
Yeah, risk averse.
It's well thought out. It's going to be there for protection no matter what.
Absolutely.
Exactly right. We are not going to get caught flat-footed. That is for sure.
That's so funny.
But the other concentric circle is our agents. And I never underestimate the power of those 20,000 independent contractors, because what we did also in advance was prepare social content and heads up and excitement for what was going to happen so they weren't caught off guard out in a community somewhere.
Got it.
And they were ready en masse to attack the internet with their social posts and promotions and leaning
Immediately.
into agent State Farm.
Right.
And that was yet another way.
And that's what I was saying Poppy was doing also. You have, so it's a multi-pronged campaign. You don't just have the Super Bowl commercial. You have all this stuff around it. So let's switch gears just a little, because you mentioned this and I'm curious. So the historic State Farm ads were pretty interesting too, and quite different from this. So can you talk about the campaign that happened before and a little bit background like you're giving on this campaign about those previous campaigns?
Sure. So last year we did a TikTok. So the last 2 years actually we did TikToks, and I'll back up to tell you why. So the one before that was Drake from State Farm that we already talked about.
Right.
That was to launch the asset Jake from State Farm and start to cement it. Great, check, did it, and he's become a cultural icon, if I may say that.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next year we always look at the business conditions, the market, what's going on, what do we need, what are we looking to achieve when we think about the Super Bowl. And that year, after Drake from State Farm and the launching of that asset, Jake, we put Jake from State Farm on TikTok as an influencer. He's over 1 million followers today.
Oh, wow.
He's getting pretty big actually already. And at that time, we put him on in the month of November. And of course, the Super Bowl would be the following February. And we thought, we've got to, more than a linear spot on television, we need to drum up the interest and excitement around the TikTok account. So we did a contest where somebody could win being in a commercial with Jake. And that was the goal. So it wasn't about, we have to be on television this year. It was about, make that TikTok platform, create awareness and make it relevant. So that was that year. I'll pause. Should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
Yep.
Okay, so then the next year, so we had a lot of success with TikTok and Jake's following grew quite a bit then. And we've since continued to get smarter and smarter about that asset and about that platform. So it continues to grow. But then the next year, of course, the question comes up, hey, are we going to do a Super Bowl ad this year? And what we knew was we had stadium naming rights last year. It was the Super Bowl was at State Farm Stadium. And we were thinking to ourselves, well, I don't need to buy a 30 or 60-second spot on television. My brand's going to be on television for 4 hours.
Right.
So we aren't aware of brands leaning into stadium naming rights in a way we did last year.
Right.
So as you know, typical, or at least last year, viewing for the Super Bowl is about 110 million people. And we had the naming rights. So we're like, okay, that's good. How do we create interest in the brand, but do it on TikTok, again, to drive Jake and again, to be creative and think out of the box. And again, the creative drives the execution. Because we had naming rights, there was the biggest TikToker at the time, Kabi Lame, and he very famously shrugs. He speaks zero, so I'm hoping in a podcast this is coming off. Imagine me going,
yes.
But we had an activation on TikTok that said, we don't need to go to the big game. The big game has come to us, with Kabi pointing at the stadium logo.
Wow.
And that TikTok got 220 million views on its own.
Wow.
And so we thought that's a
win.
really good compliment to
Allison Griffin, State Farm's head of marketing. This is unbelievable. And so that was a flex. So I'm not, it's hard. I'm thinking insurance. Why are you all so cool at State Farm? Why are you so good at this? This is incredible. It's like, this is so amazing. Like, how do you come up with these ideas and like make sure that they're so deep and so well thought out and so well executed? I mean, how does this happen?
So we've done a lot, we've refreshed our brand in 2020 and knew, the leadership of the company was on a march toward making the brand cool and setting ourselves apart. Because listen, it's a tough category. It's competitive. We actually have the smallest of the budgets of our competitors in the market, which is well known and documented, not sharing anything private there. And so in order to punch above our weight and in order to resonate, especially with younger and younger audiences, because look, we all know any global marketer, not just the US, not just insurance, there's a tsunami of wallets in young millennials, Gen Zs, and now even Gen Alphas coming that the world has never seen.
Yes.
And they are a tough audience to reach. We know that having a great State Farm app can't just compare to another insurance industry app.
Yeah.
It's that the standard is Amazon or Apple or things. And so we're smart enough to know that the global market is dictating attention, where people are paying attention. And if we need to set ourselves apart, we've got to be innovative and cutting edge. And our whole mission is to create the conditions over time that allows us to take advantage of things like the Mama Kelsey moment.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you, because you had in your old ads Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes and all that in your old. But how did all that play into it? Because those ads were very different from what you're talking about. They seemed almost hokey. Like Andy Reid's not that good an actor, you know what I mean? So like it was
but he's lovable. So what we do is contextually relevant ads. So that's not our general market ad. We only play the football ads in football. So he's known there, he plays there. We only play the NBA ads in NBA plays.
Target marketing. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And then we have general market is where you'll see someone like a Jimmy Fallon or a Ludacris that we have currently, or Jake himself, or just the representation of an agent and no celebrity.
100%.
So the point is you'll never ever see an Andy Reid ad outside of the football context, no matter what. Anyway.
That's smart. And I love the idea, Barbara. The point is that, all of this investment right now for these younger people, at some point they're going to say, I guess I need some insurance. What's going to be popping in their mind
of
at
course,
that point? Right? It'll be there.
Top of the funnel.
It's going to be there, man.
That's a top of the funnel strategy. Yeah. But that's interesting because I didn't realize it was a local ad because, of course, Andy Reid was in the Super Bowl. So he became a national figure. So I thought
we were so fortunate. We had Travis Kelce in an ad before any of this Taylor Swift came up. We filmed those last summer, the Mahomes and Ma Auto. And so that was an interesting, again, create the conditions to which you could take advantage of a moment in the moment. But look, it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to go and take a risk like that, especially in the insurance category where we are in the risk business.
Exactly.
Not our favorite thing to do is taking big risks, but creating those moments. And so when Taylor Swift showed up to Travis's game, 1 week later we had Jake from State Farm in the stands, but not at a Chiefs game, of course, famously. At an Eagles game, supporting the other brother.
There you have it.
Exactly, right. And that is like the biggest story. People are talking about that Kelsey story is the biggest story in our cultural moment. Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. And so now that you've told us this deep, deep marketing strategy, where can our listeners go to follow what you're doing and everything that's going on at State Farm?
Oh gosh, I'm on LinkedIn and I love talking about marketing. So
you certainly do.
Well, you're very good at it.
And you're excellent at it.
Well, thank you.
And I love the 360 campaign. It's great.
There.
Yeah.
Well, thank
you. And this year we're excited about continuing to lean into our jingle. You'll see more and more and fun activations around the actual notes are coming soon to a commercial near you.
Oh,
very exciting.
That's very cool. Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for today. We'd like to thank our producers, Deion Simpkins and Dana Cash. We're here every Wednesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we replay our show several times throughout the week. This has been Marketing Matters. I'm Barbara Kahn, here with Americus Reed, Business Radio, SiriusXM 132.